Imagine walking into a grocery store tomorrow morning. You grab milk, eggs, bread, maybe some meat. But when you reach the shelf, something feels strange. The prices are unbelievably low. Bread costs almost nothing. Gas is suddenly cheap. Rent is frozen. At first, it sounds amazing. People celebrate. Politicians take credit. Social media explodes with excitement. Finally, life feels affordable again. But then, something unexpected starts happening. The shelves slowly become emptier. Lines grow longer. Stores stop restocking products. Gas stations run out of fuel. And suddenly, the cheap prices that made everyone happy begin creating chaos. This is the hidden danger of government price controls. And throughout history, countries around the world have repeatedly learned the same painful lesson. When governments try to control prices too aggressively, the economy often breaks in unexpected ways. But why does this happen? Why can't governments simply force companies to charge lower prices forever? And if price controls are so dangerous, then why do politicians keep trying them? In this video, we're going to break down exactly what happens when governments control prices, using real economics, real history, and real examples that affected millions of people. And by the end of this video, you'll understand something most people never realize. Prices are not just numbers. Prices are signals. And when those signals are artificially manipulated, entire economies can start collapsing from the inside out. Let's start with the basics. A price control happens when the government sets rules limiting how high or low prices can go. There are two main types: price ceilings and price floors. A price ceiling means the government says, this product cannot be sold above this price. For example, rent control, gas price caps, food price limits, medicine price caps. A price floor is the opposite. The government says, this product cannot be sold below this price. Examples include minimum wage laws and agricultural price supports. Now on paper, price controls often sound compassionate. Politicians usually introduce them during inflation, housing crises, economic hardship, or emergencies. And emotionally, the idea makes sense. If prices are hurting people, why not simply force prices lower? That sounds logical, but economics becomes complicated very quickly because prices do something extremely important in society. They balance supply and demand. And once governments interfere with that balance too aggressively, unintended consequences begin appearing everywhere. Most people think prices are just numbers attached to products, but economists see prices differently. Prices are information. They tell producers what people want, how badly they want it, and how scarce something is. Imagine gasoline suddenly becomes scarce after a major hurricane. Normally, gas prices rise. People hate this. But that higher price actually sends important signals. Consumers use less gas. Suppliers rush to bring more fuel, and companies work harder to solve shortages. High prices create incentives. Now imagine the government says, no station can charge more than $2 per gallon. At first, drivers celebrate. Cheap gas sounds wonderful. But now something dangerous happens. Demand explodes. Everyone wants more gas because it's artificially cheap. Meanwhile, suppliers make less profit, so they become less motivated to deliver more fuel. Result: massive shortages, long lines, panic buying, and eventually, empty gas stations. The low price created the illusion of affordability, while actually making the product harder to find. This is one of the biggest economic lessons in history. When prices cannot adjust naturally, shortages often appear. America experienced something like this during the 1970s energy crisis. Oil shortages hit global markets. The U.S. government introduced price controls on gasoline. The intention was simple: protect consumers from painful prices, but the result became disastrous. Drivers waited in massive gas lines for hours. Some stations ran completely dry. Panic spread across the country. Why? Because controlled prices discouraged supply while demand remained extremely high. People still wanted fuel, but companies had fewer incentives to increase production and distribution. The market signal became distorted, and the shortage worsened. This shocked many Americans, because they realized something uncomfortable. Low prices do not automatically create abundance. Sometimes, they create scarcity. Now let's talk about one of the most controversial price controls in America: rent control. Rent control happens when governments limit how much landlords can charge tenants. Again, the goal sounds noble. Housing is expensive. People need affordable homes, so politicians try to stop rents from rising too fast. But over time, problems often emerge. Imagine you own an apartment building. Maintenance costs rise, property taxes rise, repair costs rise, insurance rises, but the government limits how much rent you can charge. Eventually, profits shrink. So what happens? Some landlords stop maintaining buildings properly. Others convert apartments into condos. Some stop building new housing entirely. And over many years, housing supply slows down. Meanwhile, population continues growing. Demand increases, but supply fails to keep up. Result: housing shortages. And ironically, the remaining uncontrolled apartments often become even more expensive. Here's something important most people overlook. When prices are artificially low, products often stop going to the people who need them most. Instead, products go to whoever gets there first, without price signals. Rationing changes. Instead of prices rationing products, lines ration products, connections ration products, luck rations products. This creates black markets, and black markets appear constantly under heavy price controls, because whenever governments force prices too low, demand exceeds supply, and when shortages happen, unofficial sellers step in. People begin reselling products secretly at higher prices. This happened repeatedly throughout history. Fuel shortages, food shortages, housing shortages, medicine shortages. Once official prices become unrealistic, underground markets grow rapidly. Humans respond strongly to incentives. When something becomes artificially cheap, people usually consume more of it. Imagine if steak suddenly cost $1. People would buy enormous amounts. Restaurants would overload suppliers. Stores would empty instantly. But ranchers cannot magically produce cattle overnight. Supply takes time, so suddenly, demand explodes faster than production, and shortages begin immediately. This is why economists say prices help coordinate society. Prices help distribute limited resources. Without functioning price systems, economies become chaotic. If price controls are risky, why do governments keep using them? Because politically, they are extremely tempting. When inflation hurts voters, politicians face pressure to do something, and price controls create immediate emotional relief. Consumers love seeing lower prices, even if the long-term consequences become harmful later. Politically, short-term popularity often matters more than long-term efficiency, especially during elections, economic crises, wars, or public outrage over high prices. Price controls can temporarily calm anger, but temporary relief sometimes creates larger future problems. One of history's most famous examples of widespread price controls happened in the Soviet Union. The government controlled enormous parts of the economy. Prices, production, wages, distribution. In theory, this was supposed to create equality and stability. But over time, major inefficiencies appeared. Stores often lacked basic goods. Long lines became normal. Consumers had very little choice. Innovation slowed dramatically compared to competitive capitalist economies, because prices were no longer functioning as natural market signals. Factories produced goods based on government targets, not consumer demand. This created bizarre outcomes: too much of some products, severe shortages of others, low-quality manufacturing, and little incentive to improve products. The economy became rigid and inefficient. Now, let's connect this to inflation. Inflation means prices rise across the economy over time. People naturally hate inflation because food becomes expensive. Rent increases, wages feel weaker, and savings lose value. So price controls often become politically attractive during inflation spikes. But inflation itself usually comes from deeper economic causes. Money supply growth, supply chain disruptions, energy shocks, labor shortages, excessive demand. Simply freezing prices does not remove those underlying problems. Instead, it often hides them temporarily, and hidden problems usually return later, sometimes even worse. Healthcare is one of the most controversial price control debates in America today. Many Americans struggle with extremely high medical costs. Some people argue the government should cap prices. Others warn too much control may reduce innovation. Pharmaceutical companies spend billions developing new drugs. Supporters of market pricing argue that high profits encourage medical innovation. Critics argue those profits make healthcare unaffordable. This debate shows the difficult balance between affordability, innovation, incentives, and public welfare. There are no easy answers. Sometimes governments use temporary price controls during disasters, hurricanes, pandemics, wars. This often targets price gouging. Imagine bottled water suddenly costs $100 during a disaster. Most people feel this is immoral, so governments sometimes restrict emergency pricing. But even here, economists debate the consequences. Higher prices discourage panic buying, and they also attract more suppliers into affected areas. But morally, many people believe essential goods should not become luxury items during emergencies. This is where economics and ethics collide. At the core of economics is one brutal reality. Resources are limited. There is never unlimited housing, gasoline, labor, food, medicine, or production capacity. Prices help societies manage scarcity. And when governments distort prices too heavily, scarcity doesn't disappear. It simply shows up somewhere else. Empty shelves, waiting lists, shortages, rationing, declining quality, black markets. The laws of supply and demand do not disappear because politicians dislike them. Free market supporters argue that flexible prices solve shortages faster because high prices encourage rapid responses, more production, more investment, more innovation, and more supply. If oil prices rise dramatically, energy companies rush to increase production. If housing becomes profitable, developers build more homes. If semiconductor demand rises, companies invest billions into chip factories. Prices create incentives for expansion. That's why market economies often adapt faster than heavily controlled systems. But let's be fair. Free markets are not perfect either. Uncontrolled markets can create exploitation, monopolies, extreme inequality, environmental damage, and corporate abuse. This is why almost every modern economy uses some combination of markets, regulations, taxes, and government intervention. The debate is not government or markets. The real debate is how much intervention creates the best balance. Too little regulation can become dangerous. Too much control can also become dangerous. Finding balance is extremely difficult. Here's the biggest lesson most people never realize. Economies are incredibly complex systems. Changing one price affects thousands of connected decisions: production, investment, hiring, transportation, consumer behavior, and innovation. Prices are deeply connected to incentives, and incentives shape human behavior. That's why price controls often create unintended consequences that politicians never expected. The economy reacts dynamically, sometimes violently. So, what happens when governments control prices? At first, life can appear cheaper and more affordable. Consumers feel relief. Politicians gain popularity. But underneath the surface, economic pressure begins building. Shortages emerge. Supply weakens, black markets appear, innovation slows, investment declines, because prices are not just numbers. They are signals that coordinate the behavior of millions of people and businesses. And when those signals become distorted, economies often struggle to function efficiently. That doesn't mean governments should never intervene. Sometimes regulation is necessary. Sometimes markets fail. Sometimes emergencies require action. But history repeatedly shows that aggressive long-term price controls often create consequences far worse than people expected. And that's why the debate over government price control continues today, not just in America, but around the entire world.